What up, Raffleators? Welcome back to my channel. Here we are back in Roxanne Burnham Gardens. We're taking a look at some of the new developments in this neck of the woods. So what has happened in the last 50 years or so that this neighborhood has been transformed from what was an initial housing scheme into what is now a middle-class residential neighborhood. People are building larger houses. As you can see, the smaller homes were what was originally built, and now much larger homes have replaced those initial housing scheme homes, so that the neighborhood has been transformed from what was once a working class neighborhood into a middle class neighborhood. So for example, this is what the original house looks like when it was built, and now people are building much larger single family, but two-story and more units. There's also some commercial property moving into this neighborhood. So these are some homes that are now commercial and residential. But this is what the early housing schemes looks like, right? Some of these homes are or started construction and have not been completed, and some in fact have been revised and completed and so on. But what we're looking at is the layout of these neighborhoods. Now recently in the news there is an incident where the homes of some 45 families were destroyed on the Linden-Suzaik Highway just outside of Linden, or 10 miles outside of Linden, 10 kilometers outside of Linden. And they claim, that is, the government claims, that these people were squatting on public lands and that they needed to be removed. So they sent in bulldozers while the people were away and demolished their homes. The problem, of course, is not that people are squatting illegally. The problem is that no more neighborhoods like this have been built since the 1970s for Guyanese, for working class and middle class Guyanese. What the government did, this is the current government did, during the first 23 years they were in power, is they built new housing developments for themselves and their political acolytes, their cronies, their supporters, and they neglected to build these housing schemes for average Guyanese. So there is not really a plan to build housing schemes or housing developments in Guyana for about 23 years. And then they started giving land to private developers who built schemes that are not necessarily accessible for, working class people. And those working class people who couldn't afford the land or the private developments decided to take matters into their own hands after applying for land, which they are allowed to do through the Ministry of Housing. You can apply for a house lot. This is something that should take a few weeks or a few days at most if there was a plan, if they had a building plan. But what has happened is that over the years, the housing ministry has not been keeping up with the demand for land, even though this is a country with millions of acres of vacant land. And as a result, people have decided to take matters into their own hands and to squat on land that belongs to the government, to the people, public land. And now the government has responded by demolishing those squatting areas. Alright, so this isn't part of the neighborhood we've seen before. So the point I'm making is that the housing developments that are currently being built, and there's one across behind all of this vegetation, bush. The housing developments that are built in the last 5 years or so are built by private developers, and they were not accessible to people of ordinary means. They're not accessible to working class people. Guyana still has a minimum wage that is below the poverty line. Right? The government does not employ policy to keep poor people above poverty. So this is what is being built, that is neighborhoods built by private developers, and the only people who could afford those to live in these neighborhoods, right, the private housing developments, is the people who are migrating, coming back from abroad, who have access to capital from abroad and who can buy these properties with earnings that they made living abroad. And so you have these new neighborhoods like Floral Park. So what I want to do in this series of videos is to look at some of the new neighborhoods that have been built by private developers, and some that have been land distributed by the government, places like Eccles and Providence. And then look at some of the squatting areas. So what you'll see is that there is a very slow distribution of land, right? So this is the new development, one of the private developers. You can see Basu Developers Inc., right? And that's their Floral Park, is their development. So what has happened in recent times is that the government has given the land, or at least sold the land, to these private developers, and they've built property, homes that can only be purchased by people of means, people of substantial means, because these houses are not cheap. And at the same time, the Ministry of Housing has neglected its duty to distribute land, house lots, at a pace that is sufficiently matches the demand for land by citizens. And so you have people who are squatting, and now you have a political crisis. In the middle of this political season, the government is destroying people's homes. First it was demolishing people's homes, poor people's homes, because they wanted to build a road, a highway, right, in the East Bank Bypass Road, and we're going to see some of those areas where the homes were demolished. And then they claim that the land that these people are occupying off the Linden Susan Highway is illegal. So they've demolished people's homes. That's the long and short of it. What we're going to do next is take a look at some of these neighborhoods that are being developed and compare them with ones like this one that was developed back in the 1970s. And what you'll find is that there's a lot more planning in the 1970s and the 1980s when these homes were built and these neighborhoods were laid out than there is now in 2023, right, under this new government that has now been in power for about 25, 26 years. So that's what's happening here, guys. That's what videos coming up for the next couple of videos in this series. Share this video with friends and family around the world. Let people know what's happening here in South Ranville. Well, we just crossed over from Burnham Park into South Ranville, and let people know what's happening here in Georgetown, Guyana. Later!